Hey guys, so I hope my dogs don't disturb you in the background. There's a ceremony going on down in the community, a Muslim one, and the sound is travelling up the hill and making them bark, so I'm sorry if you hear them. Very beautiful ceremony, you can hear the singing when the dogs are quiet, that is. So I want to speak about something which is very personal aspect of my spiritual journey, and something I've gone through recently, and a massive lesson that I've learned, and a massive progression I feel I've gone through at the same time. This is very related to anxiety, and I practice a lot of meditation, I eat correct, I exercise. I try not to eat at the wrong times. If I'm going into a stressful situation, I'd rather go into it with an empty stomach so my mind is sharp. So I'm very conscious of the effect of that with regards to it. So this is management of the stress within your body. Could be deemed as anxiety management as well, because you do gain anxiety from stress. And recently I've faced a lot of problems with stress here, just because there is a colossal level of pressure on a person when they feel they are responsible for 60-something children day and night, for food, shelter and everything in between, love and care and medication and clothing and education. Then I've got these dogs you can hear in the background, probably, which are numbering nearly the same amount as dogs as what we have children, who are, to my children as well. And completely dependent, again, in my mind, on myself and what's going on here. Then on top of that, you have it's now nearly 600 children in the Children's Fund. And it was over, but sponsors cancel. We don't get new sponsors coming in, so it's unfortunate. So we have just under 600 children. And they are, in my mind, relying on myself to get everything that they require. And this was adding up to a lot of anxiety. On top of that, the 36 staff and their families who rely completely on this place. A lot of stress, a lot of responsibility for one person to carry. But my anxiety was unwarranted. My stress was unwarranted. This is stressful. It's stressful to be running out of money and to need food and to not know where your income's coming from or if it's going to come. And it's stressful to need to have that level of faith, because ultimately we are at the grace and the mercy of God. We don't have a set income for everything. We have child sponsorships, which we know is coming in, but people can cancel, or people don't pay, or they don't have the money in their PayPal and it doesn't come through. And it's never guaranteed with that, but you get an idea of what you're going to get. But with regards to the donations and these children and expanding Feather's Tail and feeding the children, and I've had 3 children in intensive care this month, which is a huge cost from nowhere. Cars breaking down, stuff of this nature. You don't have anything but prayer. You just have to get on your knees and say, hey, you can see this. And all of these things equate to a lot of stress. But they equated to much more stress than what they needed to. I can't take away the idea that my life here will be stressful. It's difficult to look after sick children. It's difficult to, as you know, recently have a child that you love die in your arms. It's stressful for anybody. This is stressful. However, the level of stress I was placing on myself was coming from a different source than the events here. And God has been very slow in teaching me this, and has been very quick to comfort me when I've needed it as well. But he was slow to teach me because it was necessary. He was slow because he couldn't get through to show me my mistake. And I guess if I'm making this mistake, for all my life is a little different to most persons, people still have responsibilities for their families, loved ones, work, etc. So for sure people get stressed, and for certain people get anxious. But here's where I made a very big mistake. As I said at the beginning of that list, I was getting the feeling of pressure because I was seeing it as I am responsible. Now you see, I often have said here in my worry and on YouTube, what happens to these children if something happens to me? And I've carried this for a long time. I carried this for 1.5 years at least. Now it's important that I still make provisions for this place to be sustainable, so as these children have guaranteed income from what I plan to do with having a farm and so on and so forth. When God sees that we are ready to manage that, then I know he will bring that to us. Or he will bring those who can answer that prayer, shall we say. But right now we have more urgent prayers like housing, etc. Now, pride. Pride plays a role. Now, I'm not a proud man as such. I'm aware that I need to be humble, and I'm aware God did this. I'm aware that I couldn't have done this without God. I'm aware God did this using me. I was blessed enough to be chosen to be used. But prior to myself giving my life to God, I could not have done this. I was too weak. I was a boy in a man's body. Far too undisciplined, far too weak. Far too undisciplined and too weak. And this is the problem with many men on the planet. And I don't want to speak in a sexist way, but let's say men and women, but speaking from a male perspective, as I go back to the West, I see many able-bodied men who are far too immature. You know, they're propping up bars with groups of friends, feeling they belong to something, but I have empathy because they seek to belong to something and don't know where to find it due to the way our system is. But I was too immature, and I was too proud back then. Now I'm conscious that I should not be proud of what I've achieved here, because I could not have achieved it without God. I should be nothing but humble and grateful that God saw fit to use I. However, if you listen to what I've been saying, what will happen to these children if something happens to me? Where's God? Where is God in my statement of saying that? Perhaps there's someone way better than I to do this job, and perhaps if I drop down dead tomorrow, God will just insert them within a few weeks, because God is God. And God did all of this, not me. And this is the type of pride that's crept up in my life. And in my recent weeks of doing some heavy disciplining and fasting, God has managed to purge this from me a little and make me see what I was doing. But he wasn't angry at me. It wasn't like I was boasting, look what I've done. It was that I was bearing a burden that I was never supposed to bear. I was bearing a burden that was only ever God's burden. Because I was saying, what happens without me? Well, perhaps God will replace you with something better. Perhaps there's someone can come. But I couldn't see it because I was putting it on me. I was being prideful in my own way. But because I was allowing myself to be that way, I was bearing a burden, a stress, a strain, a responsibility that I was never supposed to bear alone. Now, if you look, or if I look to where my stress was coming from, And with it, anxiety, which comes with stress, guaranteed. Doesn't matter how much you meditate, if you're getting stressed and you're living in a world like this where you've got so many people pulling on you, stress will always be part of life. Let me just clear that up. But to add the additional burden of feeling responsible and bearing the burden of this whole place on myself, even though I say, this is God's house, God built it, but I still had this ignorant, arrogant pride of what happens to it without me. Never thinking, well, whenever I pray to God, he answers. See, clearly he's watching these children. And in my ignorant pride, I took on the full burden of this place as if it was all just going to be on me. And it was as if I had this column in me where I understood that God was part of it and God was doing it and God did it. But I had this tiny column going up inside it that was saying to myself in a prideful way, without you, it's over. And I was trying to put on my own shoulders the burden that belongs to God. And the stresses I was feeling, well, to feel a stress and a yearning in my heart for a new centre here for these special needs children, because we're running out of space and I've got lots of children to come. And to get so frustrated and stressed over that, and say to God, what's the hold up? What's going on? Why can't you do this? Don't you see what's happening to these children? And it was only the other day I sat back and realised I wouldn't even want that centre if God hadn't told me to come here. And God knows my desires because he gave me them. And my desires are simply his desires manifest in a human. And my eagerness to see them manifest is his eagerness. And the pressure I feel in part, just a part, is a fraction of the pressure on he. And I realised I'd been holding the burden alone. And once I realised those things, that my desires are God's desires, well, I wouldn't be desiring a centre for special needs children if he hadn't gotten me to come here. I hadn't realised that maybe if something bad does happen to me, maybe there's someone he can, like me, out there he can replace me with to fill this role. And this I see as my pride, which led to my anxiety. Now the Bible, strangely enough, there's some lines in the Bible, and the Bible I used to look at in a very different way, but truly it's a manual and it has answers to everything. Because in the Bible, when mentioning anxiety, it says, cast your anxiety to I. But how do you give your anxiety over to God? Well, prior to it saying that, it says, humble yourself. And that's because when you cast your anxiety to God, you can't cast your anxiety to God. But if you humble yourself and remove the pride, even if you're ignorant to it and you can't see it or not, but if you can humble yourself and see it and take it away, the result is that your anxiety is cast to God. And I just wanted to say that this is something that I've gone through. I'm still developing, still learning. I live a very unusual life, very unusual circumstances. But that can translate to anybody's life. Humble yourself, remove your pride, and your stresses, your anxieties can be passed over. And God can bear the burden or help you bear the burden. So, Much love. Bye.
Universal test, feel the weight of my love, put your hand on my chest and rest in the cradle of my arms. The battle that we face is the place where our scars come from. And to pick up the gun, my love, we are destined to teach these ones to be brave and never run away. Courage is birthed from the womb on the first light of day. Yeah, the day you were born, you came out perfect, never meant to be torn in silence.